Hello and welcome to Sacred Mindshift Circle. My name is Dalia Demardanos, and today our guest is Sophia Demas, an award-winning author and mental health therapist who has spent her life exploring the meaning and impact of meaningful coincidences and miraculous events. She is the author of The Divine Language of Coincidence: How Miracles Transformed My Life After I Began Paying Attention, a memoir in which she reflects on a lifetime of synchronicities that opened her eyes to what she believes is divine guidance hidden in everyday moments. Sophia has had three diverse careers, from a decade in architecture to running her own couture fashion business to working in a private practice as a therapist. She created Living a Fearless Life, which was a program designed to empower at-risk women, including working with ex-trafficked and ex-homeless women. And through her work, she encourages people to pay attention to the messages and patterns that may be guiding their lives in unseen ways. Welcome, Sophia.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Okay, so as I mentioned before, I've seen a couple of your podcasts, and I was so interested to bring you on because I found a lot of what you were saying fascinating. I resonated with a lot of it, but I want to start from the beginning. So kind of let's, begin with who or how did you grow up? What was the environment like in your home? When did you start realizing that you had this ability to notice these coincidences?
Okay. So I was Greek is my first language. Okay. So I grew up, with my mother. I credit my mother with a lot of this. So I was born in Detroit, and then when my my father, my parents were kind of a generation older than my other friends' parents. And so when my father retired when he was 65 and I was 8, we moved to Greece. And, in Detroit, we didn't have any, there's no family. My father worked at the Ford Motor Company in Dearborn. And, it was just my mother's friends. And when we went to Greece, there was just this extended family, and it was just this magical childhood. And then we moved to Oregon when I was 11. Um, but it was really interesting because a podcaster, another podcaster, asked me that. Well, she said, everybody has a miracle story or a coincidence story, but she said the sheer number of experiences you have is truly remarkable. She said, what would you attribute that to? And I really thought about it, and I am crediting my mother because my mother was deeply religious, but she never pushed it on me. But here is what she would say to me from being a toddler. So in the Greek language, you could take any item, and by putting this suffix at the end, it makes it diminutive. It makes it cute. So we have the glass, and then we have the little glass. So it's a way of just sort of making these items, just cute. So what she would say to me is, Sophia, if you want something, ask little baby Jesus, because he loves children. And if it's good for you, you'll get it. He'll give it to you. And, sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and you're scared of the dark. Well, ask the little Virgin Mary to protect you. And so, what she was doing from a very, very young age, she she made it perfectly natural of communicating with unseen beings. And so I've just spent my life asking for things and then saying thank you over. I mean, I say thank you all day long. So that's kind of how it all started, you know. So therefore I was quite open.
Okay, so it started with basically your mom, at least letting you understand that you could have asked for like intercession, basically,
Yes.
right? So it opened you up to, I guess, what was spirituality.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And so it was when I was 19 that I was grappling with these existential issues, like, and there were two issues that I considered to be unsolvable. Okay. And one was my mother's rule of no sex until marriage. And I was like, marriage just was not I mean, I just was, I didn't like the concept of marriage. Okay. So I was like, wait a second, if I decide not to get married, which I decided not to get married, okay, am I going to die a virgin? And that didn't sit well with me. And so I had just met this man that he was 27, and I was deathly attracted to him. And he was working on his PhD on universal theory or whatever, and very intellectual. And I was a party girl, but I was deathly, attracted to him. So that was one issue, because it was like, I mean, you just don't. I mean, I had bought this my mother's rules. And then the other issue was I needed people to approve of me. I felt like I was this nice person, and there was this one girl in college that didn't like me, and I had done nothing to her, and I'm thinking, and so I just, I was grappling with it, because like, why there were some, maybe through my childhood, there was other kids maybe that didn't like me, and it just was just bothering me. And so anyway, so I had this dream, and I'm just gonna do the beginning and the end, but I was on stage in a white wedding dress with no groom, and so all these events happened, and this is all in the book because it was so profound. And so I was understanding that this was a wedding, and all these people had come to see me. And it was an amazing, amazing dream. And then at the very end, as people are filing by, which I thought, oh, this is the reception line, I look down, and I'm wearing the white wedding dress, but I'm in a coffin. And these people were paying their last respects. So I woke up and freaked out. It was 1:30 in the morning. And I went to this man's house because I knew that he was up like till 3 in the morning doing his dissertation or whatever. And he sat me down, and I told him what just had happened, because I thought what the dream was doing was it was an omen of my, you know, impending death. So it was kind of like,
Very.
yeah. And he said to me, he listened, and he said to me, this has nothing to do with physical death. He says, what this means is it's time to get rid of these thoughts or behaviors that no longer work for you, and to supplant them with behaviors that do. And it was like this. It was, and I mean, it was like, whoa, there's truth to this. And of course, he was my first sexual experience, but not that night. It was the week after. And I mean, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And so that issue was solved, okay? And then this girl in class, we were forced to be in the same study group. And one time, I don't, it was like just her and me, and we started talking. And she was beautiful, but she wore frumpy clothes. Like she wanted to hide she wanted to be known for her intellectual thing. And and I guess I loved clothes. So she had a problem with me, like dressing up. So I said to her, I said, you should celebrate your womanhood. and she started to change and we became friends. And so it was like, wait a second, her not liking me is not my problem. It's her problem. Like, look at this, So it was, and then this guy, the guy, it was like from beginning to end, it was maybe like 2 or 3 months. It was like he was this angelic intervention that shows up, helps me through this difficult time, and I'm transformed. And that was not lost on me. So I thought, wow, this was sent to me, and so I just became more open to things like this, and then they just came pouring in.
Yeah, I think this is where that expression comes from that some people come into your life for like a season, for a lesson or something of that nature. And even when, in this case, in this this guy, he contributed to your, I guess, how should we say, your development, right? Your development is psychologically and emotionally. But even when we are in relationships with people who test us, who give us a hard time, I do think that, like, for whatever reason, they're supposed to do that. That's supposed to kind of happen sometimes to maybe help us to learn something that we need to work on in ourselves, because that's what I've noticed, especially when it comes to relationships. So,
Well, interestingly, so I write about all my miraculous experiences, but I also count obstacles as miraculous interventions, because how many times have I, like, things have not gone my way? And how many times have I said, God, why are you doing this to me? And whether it's directly afterward or 2 years down the line, I have thanked God for those obstacles. And that is, again, expanding our awareness, so that if you keep banging your head against the wall, maybe somebody's trying to tell you something.
that's the idea that we sometimes in the moment don't realize what it's about, but then later on, as time passes, we come to the realization that it was something that maybe was necessary.
And see,
Mhm,
I think it's very unfortunate that God gave us free will,
mhm.
because, like, let's say, this example I give is like, let's say I wanted a red Ferrari. Okay. And I couldn't get the money, or in one obstacle after the other, but I have free will, and I'm going to get that red Ferrari no matter what. So I go get the red Ferrari. I'm driving, get in a crash, and die. Maybe I should have listened to those obstacles. So my very briefly, my philosophy is that there's a divine intelligence that knows what is best for us better than we do, and communicates with us via dreams, putting a stranger in our lives that says exactly what we need, or puts coincidences in our path. And so I didn't want to get married. I didn't want children so I could focus on my careers. And I was told, like, I don't know, 18 years ago, that I was going to write a book. And it was a medium. She was world famous. And she told me that I was going to write a book. And I looked at her and I said, I'm sorry, but this is not in the cards. I said, first of all, I have nothing to write about, but I am a people person, and there is no way that I'm going to sequester myself somewhere and write a book. And she just listened to me. Because I thought, just because you're world famous doesn't mean you're always right. And she said, word for word, she said, Spirit says when she's ready, there are many spirits here to help her and many hands on earth. And that's how it went down. So I was successfully single. Until I was 45. I In 2011, one of my mentors, Father Stephen, who opened all the Covenant houses, which are shelters for homeless youth, introduced me to this lovely young woman who found herself in the shelter from Turkey. This long, long story. I mean, experienced such abuse and abandonment. And she had just turned 19 that week. And Frank and I ended up adopting her. So Mother's Day became my new favorite holiday. And then I've written 2 books. So this is, and I can't be happier. I can't be happier. So what if I had been, stubborn and was hanging on to my decisions? I mean, look what I would have missed out on. So, I just feel people need to hear what it can be possible.
And my next question to you, though, is how can you decipher when the coincidences are warnings not to go in one direction versus, that they are showing you that you should go in that direction? Because sometimes I think I'm sometimes a believer that certain things are from God and maybe certain things are like signs from the enemy that like, oh, this is a red flag. How do
Okay,
you
like the ego.
decipher?
Ego is the enemy. The
Mhm.
ego is the enemy,
Okay.
And well, okay, so back to not wanting to write the book. Okay, so here's what made me want to write the book. So whenever I would tell a friend about my latest miracle, um, they, everyone would respond, "Oh, these things only happen to you," which I found kind of annoying because I'm not special. I'm not a guru. I'm not a saint. And so in 2011, I reconnected with a childhood friend, and I told her my latest miracle, and she said, "Oh, these things only happen to you," and something clicked. And what I did is because the number of miracles, these events were just so many. So what I did, I sat down with a piece of paper and I tried to list all these events chronologically. And what I discovered was preceding each miracle, which I define as getting exactly what you need at the right time, there was a coincidence. And when I realized that in each case, and I can give you a couple of examples, in each case, once I took action on the coincidence, I received the gift. So when I made that realization, it was just perfectly natural to write a book and share it with the world.
What would be, for example, a coincidence that you notice before getting a miracle?
Okay, so I make the distinction between a coincidence and a meaningful coincidence. And I will give you a couple of examples, okay? So a coincidence can be, I'm thinking of you. You're my friend, I'm thinking of you, and you call me, okay? Okay, that's a coincidence, but so what? So you call me, okay, well, that's a coincidence. But I will tell you 2 coincidences that that ended up benefiting me, which is the miracle, that had to do with our wedding. Okay. So, and you can tell me which one you think is weirder. Okay, so Frank and I decided to get married on 4th of July, and we picked October 4th as the wedding date, which is July, August, September, October, 3 months. Okay, all the venues were taken. I mean, everything was taken. And I thought, I don't care. I have a friend who's a wedding planner. She can make a warehouse look beautiful. So, well, okay, and then I thought, okay, if we can't find any music, we'll get the organist at the church to play, whatever. So, okay. So I call my friend Anne, and this guy answers. And I said, is Anne there? And he says, Sophia, is that you? And he goes, this is Jerry. You called me. Look, I'm really late for a meeting. And I just got out of the shower and I've got to run. Can I call you later? Now, I recognized who this guy was. It was somebody that I knew socially. That's it. Okay. And I was shocked that just by saying his and there, he recognized my voice. He's got an accent. So it was easy. And I couldn't believe it. Like in all of Philadelphia, I dial a number and I get somebody that I know. Well, I said, Jerry, promise me you're going to call me. You have to call me. This is so bizarre. You were a wrong number. You have to call me. We have to talk. He says, I promise you. Okay, so he calls back. And as a result of that conversation, Jerry at the time owned the Barclay Hotel here in Philadelphia, which is this beautiful old world hotel. As a result, he gave us the ballroom for free and threw in 2 nights in the presidential suite for free. But he asked that he and his girlfriend are invited to our wedding, which I was very happy to do. Okay, so there you go, instant, beautiful ballroom for free. Okay, the other story, I get a phone call from this woman who told me that she had found my driver's license, which happened to be an Oregon driver's license. And how can she get it to me? So I said, well, we determined that she only lived a couple blocks away. And so I said, oh, just put it through the mail slot. Okay, great. And she had this lovely little note how she and her boyfriend would go to Oregon every year. 2 months later, the same woman calls and she says, I think you'll find this a little strange, but I just found your ATM card. Okay, now I don't lose my cards, but lo and behold, my driver's license was missing, and it was winter, and I know I don't carry a bag in the winter. It was in my pocket, and it fell in the snow. And so I just and what I see now what happened, because I would use this ATM machine that would immediately spit out the card after you typed in the code, but this one kept it until the end, and then it says, would you like to make another transaction? So thinking that I already had it, I left. So the person after me could just wipe out my whole bank account. But it was her. I mean, and so of course she was shocked. She says, should I put it through your mail slot? I said, no, we have to meet. You have to come over to my studio. So here comes this beautiful, young blonde with a pixie haircut. And I had a handmade bar of Oregon soap to give her for thank you. And as a result of that conversation, that meeting, turns out she's a concert violinist, and she got her friend, who's a classical guitarist, to play my favorite piece of music, Concierto de Aranjuez, as I'm coming down the aisle.
That's incredible. That's incredible, actually, because it's like no one would actually maybe think that could be possible, but like that's incredible to me that you ended up number one that she found your ID and then also the ATM out of
Okay,
all of the people. Yeah.
here's the message. This is what I want your audience to take away from this, okay? So when Jerry said, I'll call you later, I could have very easily said, oh, you don't bother. I mean, it was a wrong number. I mean, it's wild that I got you, Jerry, but I have nothing to talk to you about, okay? But see, it wasn't like, well, should I not? It was bigger than me. So this coincidence was bigger than me. And I had to talk to him. It's just something I had to do. So I took action. I said, promise me that you will call me. And he did. And look what I got. And how easy would it have been with this woman to say, this is absolutely wild, but yeah, just put it through the mail slot. But I couldn't let it go. So, it's and I do believe that divine intelligence communicates through our intuition. Okay, and in reverse, we communicate with divine intelligence through prayer, asking for what we want, and gratitude, saying thank you. So it's a two-way street.
So tell me, for example, as you have just mentioned, it's a two-way street. So if someone were to, begin to, I guess, pray or begin to meditate a little bit more, and they were interested in recognizing these coincidences, obviously, like you said, it feels as if it's something coming from above or something else that is being,
Oh, it's from the inside. It's from the gut,
yeah.
actually.
So how would they begin to recognize these coincidences just starting, fresh?
Okay, because a lot of people have said to me, I don't know, these, I want these things to happen to me and they don't, like, and, I ask them to, well, think about how you met your husband. Maybe you were supposed to go to this event and then something happened and you went to another event. And there he was, okay? Or how did you get that job? Or how did you find out about that job? And if you start going back, you can maybe put some pieces together and connect the dots that these things have already happened to you.
Okay, and now I wanted to talk a little bit also about your second book, Consciousness Beyond Death, right? How did this book that you wrote, like what inspired you to write it, and how did that further expand your view on this reality that we live in?
Okay. So actually, it's almost like the book was kind of written by itself because when I started writing the first book, I didn't know how to organize a book, but as that um, medium had told me, you'll get help from the spirits above and hands on earth. And I did. I got amazing help. And my husband kept saying, "Don't worry about it. Just write." I said, I'm just writing about every minutia. He goes, "Just keep writing because that can be chopped off." So lo and behold, it was over 700 pages. So what I did is I took out all the events that happened to me around death and after death communication. Okay. So that became the second book. And so the byline of that is, Consciousness Beyond Death, true stories of signs, messages, and timing. The timing is just incredible here. And I can give you some examples of that. One example, it was almost like my mother wanted me to write about this because I didn't know about it. So I have a nephew who's very, very, we have a very close bond. And we're on the phone, and it was just before I was going to send the manuscript for publication. And he said, so I was telling him a story. He goes, "Oh, I don't think I've told you this story." And I said, "What story?" About, "Oh, I can't believe I haven't told you this story." I go, "Okay, tell me the story." So his oldest son, who was about 12 at the time, so he told me that when he was 1.5 years old, and my nephew was feeding him in his high chair. And he says, "I knew he was 1.5 because the only words he could say was Papa and Mama. And we were trying to teach him other words, and he just wouldn't pick up on anything." Okay. So he says, "I'm feeding him, and I had to do the little airplane thing to so he would eat, like yeah." And and all of a sudden, he said his eyes just widened, and he looked straight over my shoulder, and he's just staring, and then he starts giggling and giggling, and I said, "Teddy, who are you? What are you seeing?" And he said just definitively, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah is the Greek word for grandmother. And, Greek American kids that don't know the language, they call them yaya. But in Greek, it's yaya. And Yanni had never talked to him about my mother or yaya. And she she made it herself known to him. And I said, and you know what? I said, and she knew what she was doing, that she didn't appear to you too, because you're a non-believer, you know, but by appearing to Teddy and having that clear response made you see what is possible. So I find that just, and then that he told me just before publication. I had two stories from people incredibly close to me, my nephew and my best friend. Same incredible story that I got to write about because her dad wanted me to write about that story. So I am absolutely convinced, 100%, that when we die, we simply shed our bodies and we are as consciously present as you and I are right now. And it makes me feel great because now I know that when I die, I can be clever and communicate with the people I left behind. Convinced 100%. Can I give you two examples that happened after the book was published? One was I go to the ophthalmologist and I told her about the book. And she says to me, well, I have a story for you. I go, okay, let's have it. And she says, well, I had to go to a gala with my husband and I didn't want to go because I was dead tired and a full day of surgeries, but we had to go to the gala. And then I had to drive the babysitter home because my husband's rule is never to be alone with a female babysitter. And she said, on the way back, all of a sudden, I heard my grandmother scream, wake up! And she said, I was heading into a brick wall. She had fallen asleep at the wheel, and her grandmother saved her life. Okay? So that's one. That's unsolicited. She wasn't conscious. And if somebody says, well, okay, she was dreaming, well, the timing couldn't have been better. Okay? The other one is a year ago, I lost one of my closest friends, just this magnificent global person. And I was just devastated. And it was a heart attack. And 2 days before, to my incredibly good fortune, we had a wonderful FaceTime visit when she told me that she loved me and I was her sister. So a month after she died, I was walking down the street thinking of her, and I found myself saying to her in my thoughts, Pushpa, if there's ever a person that's going to give me a sign, it's you. I said, maybe this is too soon, but when you're ready, I want a sign from you. I swear, Dahlia, the next morning, I received a Facebook friend request from her. Now, it's happened before where somebody who's already my friend requests for me to accept, but because they want to hack my account or whatever. But there's no picture of them. But there's a picture of her. There's her picture. But from over 600 friends, that's the one that's gonna come up and give me a friend request. I mean, so I got my sign, and these things can happen to anyone.
That's absolutely fascinating. And yeah, I've had a lot of experiences that were similar, not as extraordinary because obviously, but I have had a lot of things that have made me like shudder and think like, oh my goodness, what a world that we live in.
Now, do you have an example?
Okay, so you asked me if I had an example of any kind of like meetings or I guess situations where was
After
contacted.
death communication.
Yeah, so a lot. From the time I was young, I've always had situations with sleep paralysis and all this. But I mean, the most memorable ones were actually with a mom of my friend's mom who died from cancer. And I remember that it was in the dream, and in the dream, the phone rang. And when I went to pick up the phone at the end of the dream, it was like I had just finished doing everything in the dream, and it was like the last scene of the dream. I pick up the phone and I hear the voice of my friend's mom. And it kind of freaked me out because I was like, and I didn't know what, because I was very young. I was like a teenager. And I said to myself, like, oh my gosh, go get some rest or something like this. Like, I didn't know what to say, but for me, I felt like she wasn't resting, obviously, if she was contacting me. And then besides that, my father died just a month before my 13-year-old, she's 13 now, was born. And I've had tons of dreams with him trying to send me warnings or just talking about things that were happening in his life, arguing about things that were happening in his life. And it's very interesting because sometimes I hear it as if it's like a radio, like you're picking up a radio, and then other times, depending, I guess, on what frequency I guess we're all on, I'll see them. I'll see them and they'll
Oh,
speak to me in the dream. So it's
wow.
very
Well,
interesting.
my departed loved ones know better than to appear because I would freak out, you
But
know.
in dreams,
Dream.
not never in real life.
Oh, okay, okay. No, that's happened a lot, you know. That see that and it's so interesting because I benefited so much from these things that happened to me. Uh, I mean, I got advice from my father who had died, but this phone, the telephone, they're actually called something like I forget. There is actually a term used for communication through electrical devices, and at one period of my life, it was a 3 year period, and I had two housemates and this beautiful old Victorian house. And on the first floor was this red phone. And both of my housemates, my one who owned the house, the phone rang, she picks up the phone and there's static. And her father goes, Mickey, Mickey. And he was the only person that called her Mickey. She was Michelle. And I don't know if anything else happened, but it was a definite contact. And then my other roommate, same phone, same phone, picks up the phone and it's her grandfather. And static, it was static. And I forget what the exchange was. I thought, well, when is it my turn? You know, because I never got any messages. But that is it's common. It's really common. And here's what's really interesting is that so scientists have been interested in both books. At first, just the first book on synchronicity, because synchronicities is something that's trending among scientists that study the paranormal. In fact, I was asked to help plan and participate in the Scientific and Medical Network's webinar. It was called the um, Synchronicity Summit. So here I am, the only non scientist, non academic with these scientists, you know. And it was so well received that they published a book of essays of the participants. I'm chapter 17. The book is called The Playful Universe. Okay, so that this is common, you know, but what's interesting is at first no interest in the second book. Okay, so, have you by chance heard of Dr. Eben Alexander, who wrote Proof of Heaven?
No, I've never heard of it before.
Okay, it has been it's been out a long time and bestseller. Okay, so he read my first book and loved it, and when he found out that I was publishing the second book, he said, "Send me your manuscript and I'll endorse it." I thought, fantastic, you know. So I send him the manuscript, and he writes back and he says, I'm sorry, I can't endorse your book because there's not sufficient discussion of consciousness. That was complete BS. The entire foreword was written by Dr. Deborah Green, all about consciousness and how we can communicate via consciousness. But it was code. And the code was, oh, I can be a scientist, a neurosurgeon, almost die, come back and write about it because it's an NDE. And NDEs have been studied for decades, but I can't touch your subject with a 10-foot pole. Well, lucky for me, just before publication, a new field emerged, a new field of study, ADC, after death communication. And now it's being talked about, and there's been great interest in the book. So there you go. I mean, I understand that, they need, that they well, the book of the essays, a lot of the essays of these scientists read like religious converts. I mean, it's like, oh, I was a materialist and I had to see to believe, but now, my attitude has completely changed, and so they're kind of catching up to us.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, scientists, again, from the ego perspective, and I guess for their careers, they, look at certain things as like pseudoscience and they don't want to be involved in it for their reputation. But then once the actual field opens up and now it becomes popular, now everybody's interesting. I didn't even know that that field existed. The NDE, of course, because there's so many people as well that talk about it and that come on and scientists that haven't studied it. So that one, yes, but I didn't even know that the new field had emerged.
Yes,
After
and
the
this outfit, this scientific and medical network, the executive director who has promoted my books, he's had me on his book brief, which is every month, and what he told, he put out an email and said, you can't call yourself a scientist if you discard, mountains of anecdotal evidence. So it's very much like the NDEs, like at the beginning, I'm sure it was, well, you're dreaming, but the thing is that, like there's some kind of thing your brain does, and you see a tunnel and light, and then when everybody there's this great presentation that Oprah, and I believe it's with Dr.
Dr. Phil?
No, 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 no.
No.
Anyway, I forget his name, but he studied uh, NDEs forever, for decades, and they're interviewing all these people that have gone through it and had the experience. And what really stood out to me was the stories were very similar, but each one came back with a lesson that they needed to learn. And the lessons were different, but they all kind of reported the same thing, that all of them did not want to come back, which I think is a great thing, that wherever you go, you don't want to come back, So, but I just find it interesting that these things happened and people didn't talk about them because fear of being ridiculed or whatever. But I'm telling you, there is not a doubt in my head. In fact, the second book, so the first chapter is titled My Father, which is about all these sub things that happened with my father. And the second book is My Mother. And there's a story in there that I'm not going to go into. It's the title of it is The Potty. Okay. Okay. It is the strangest thing that A, ever happened to me, and B, I've ever heard. I mean, well, one of the strangest things I've ever heard. And so when I was on a Zoom call, a meeting with these scientists, I told them my story and I said, I would like somebody to attempt to give me an explanation. They were all silent. And finally, this one scientist goes, but you know, this is the kind of story that turns people into believers. And so when I was on the phone, emailing with the executive director, I said I was really hoping that somebody would give me an explanation, but I guess, like you said, some things are just inexplicable. And he wrote back, this is a scientist, an esteemed scientist. He said, I consider this to be angelic intervention. This comes from a scientist. So there you go.
So, and I mean, when you hear these things, does it give you motivation also for how, I guess, humans are opening up to these kind of concepts a little bit more? Have you noticed like people are being more, I guess, open to believing?
It depends on where in your spiritual journey you are. I mean, there's people that have read my books, believe everything that I've written that happened to me, but don't believe that there's anything after death. How can that be? How can you believe that these things happen to me
Than not believe.
and not believe, So, like the first book, so I sent out, uh, so you get these advanced reader copies that you send to people and then they read the book, and then after publication in the first week, they write a review. So part of my book proposal was who is your target market and who is not your target market. So for who is not my target market, I put the evangelicals and the atheists. So I don't know any evangelicals, but I know a slew of atheists. So I sent 10 copies to 10 atheists. I was shocked. They had to answer some questions. So all 10 of them loved the book. All 10 said they would give it to another atheist. However, what they told me in so many words was these are not miracles, okay? These events are as a result of your all powerful mind. Your mind, manifested these events and you cleverly took the opportunity and acted on them. And these are your achievements and you have no business crediting God. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but that's stranger that my mind, like moves mountains, right? And 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 results in exactly what I need. I'm not that it can't happen. I'm not saying that because your mind can manifest, but I didn't think of half of these things I didn't even dream about. I mean, they just happen unsolicited, so I just I don't know the resistance, like I'll have a conversation, I'll tell them some examples of what happened, my stories, and I said, so what do you think happens after we die? Nothing. Like, how can I didn't dream these things up? These things truly happened. So I think it's where you are because we're on different levels of a spiritual journey. In fact, so I have 3 levels. Okay, my thing is 3 levels. So the first level I term you behave from the perspective of wishful thinking. Okay, so you wish for something. Here comes the coincidence. Here comes the dream. You go, wow, that was fantastic. What a coincidence. And you continue wishing. You don't do anything, no action taken. And you just continue wishing, and nothing happens. And then you get to the level where now you understand that you just had a major coincidence. And now you know that if you take action on it, you hopefully will get what you need. So this is from the perspective of hope. Okay, but the third level, and that is when you can reach this level of faith, the perspective of faith, you don't worry about anything. So if things don't go your way, well, it's meant not to be. If you get it, it's meant to be. And it's just you just go and you ask, and then you may get it, and maybe you won't get it. And so it depends on your approach. But I've had a lot of people that, and a lot of people who reviewed the book have said that it has changed their attitude towards belief.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that, you kind of have to surrender anyways to just because like you said, I honestly don't think that a lot of things that happen to me, things that have worked out in my way, like you say, miraculously, that there's no way that I think that I could have uh, like orchestrated it. And I really do feel like, well, I do feel that we are extensions of God, and we obviously manifest certain things through our thoughts. But I feel that regardless, there is just a divine orchestrating going on behind the scenes. One last question I wanted to ask you about, because you talk about life beyond. Do you believe in quantum immortality?
Quantum immortality. How do you define that?
So, in other words, that although we, of course, we're in this life, we're in this timeline, I guess, and then afterwards, when we die, because I always wonder about this because I do believe in it, but then sometimes I think, but yeah, but that's weird because when we get our deceased ones coming to speak to us, it's as if like they're still hanging around us. But the concept is that once you leave this life, possibly depending on the way you leave this life, you could end up in another timeline continuing on in another life. And I've heard stories of that too, but I just don't know what
Um,
I would think. Yeah.
are you talking about reincarnation?
It's reincarnation, but not exactly. It's as if like your conscious just kind of transfers onto in another.
Um, okay, now how it's been explained to me is certain souls or spirits want to contact and some don't, and so there's that aspect. But I have been wondering, I just feel like they're always there with you, always, and they're there for when you cross over. They're there. And I know that because of what happened with my mother as she was making her transition. I know exactly what happens. And so I have wondered what happens when that person reincarnates because I have been guided through a previous life, which I found fascinating. And I feel that um, I think there are souls who need more, they need to do more work, so they have to come back to Earth School. And I don't want to come back. And I don't want to come back because I've had such a fulfilling life filled with such happiness. And there's things around me I don't like. And I don't know what's going to happen to this, with climate change, with violence. So, and I think that God is going to grant me my wish because as my careers, um, transformed from one to the other, I became more non-materialistic, and my true purpose I discovered was helping others. And I think that's my true purpose. And I think if I do my true purpose, which, has motivated me to help these women, I think that my reward will be that I don't come back. So, but you said something very, um, just very true earlier about surrender. I think that is one of the keys because I live by let go, let God. You can say, and also when I pray, and pray to me is just asking for something. So when I ask for something, I always add. So I go, okay, God, I want this to happen. Okay. And then what I add after that, I said, or whatever is best, or whatever you think is best. So this is what I want. So if it's good for, it's like with my back with my mother. You ask little baby Jesus, and if it's good for you, then you'll get it. So surrender, I think, is it's absolute. It is part of the equation.
Yeah, I definitely think that it also lifts a weight off of you because sometimes people get stuck in the I want it so bad. And I think that kind of even pushes it away sometimes. So I definitely have noticed, anyways, that a lot of things that I have prayed for have come to pass. Like someone's listening. Someone's listening.
Yes.
So, so I'm very happy in that sense. And I do agree with you. I think as at least, I'm 41, I'm not that old, but I do also feel that like um I as well think that at least for me, this is it. I don't want to come back again. Not that my life has been hard or anything like this, but I've seen so many things. And, I also feel that if I can help others and just kind of like raise my children well, and that hopefully I won't have to come back again and do it all over again because, I feel that right now there are a lot of new souls that are coming in, and they're going to be the ones to continue on like shifting everything going on in this world into a higher a higher level. So for me, I think, as I've done my part by just kind of, that's why I like to spread the information, teach all of the young ones about their spiritual side, and not like thinking that it's something that's just woo woo, and that way it starts the ball rolling to people being more focused inward and not on the material things. And I think for me, if I can
Well,
get
even
that
just
done,
your platform. I
yeah.
mean, you have such a wonderful, yes, you have a wonderful platform.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sophia, for coming on the show and for participating. And like I said, if anyone wants to find any more information on Sophia, I'll leave all of the links in the description. And be sure to check out sacredmindshift.com if you want any other information, or to be up to date with any new podcasts. And thank you so much, Sophia, for coming on.
Thank you so much. Thank you.